Andy, I've often heard you say that we don't live free. Can you remind me why you say that?
Wow. Uh, it's going to get right to offending people right off the bat. It is a problem. And the strange thing is that I think freedom is limited by the nature of rights. We were talking about rights earlier. And my rights end at the end of your rights. Like we could say my physical rights end at the end of your nose and your physical rights end at the end of my nose, right? But when I'm saying we're not truly free, what I'm talking about is we don't have access to all the things we need to be free. And we have people who are claiming that we belong to them, basically. I would say slavery is a scale, right? It's a sliding index. Some slaves are comfortable slaves. Some slaves are horribly uncomfortable slaves. But the fact is, they argue that the borrower is slave to the lender, right? Which I would say is basically true. And our whole system is based on borrowing. Every dollar that's in circulation is a loan. It's a note that can be called and an interest is charged. And we borrow notes and pay back with notes. We borrow money and pay back with borrowed money. And it's very odd because we don't live in a wealth-based system. We live in a credit-based system. And if you live in a credit-based system, you're not truly free by nature, right? And I was raised thinking I was free, and I loved my freedom, and I loved my country, and I still love my country, and I still love the ideal of my country. The problem
Because this is the land of the
free,
the
and
home,
of the brave. Or maybe it's the land of ignorance and apathy now, because that's what we do. We ignore the problem, and we don't do anything about it. I like freedom. I like the ability to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And I'm not opposed to the idea that it's limited, right? That it doesn't mean I can transgress your rights. If I could, then there wouldn't be freedom, right? If you could transgress my rights, I wouldn't be free. If you could rob me, but we were talking about the law, and this I hear a lot of people talk about, and this is really what it comes down to, is the question of law. Is there such a thing? Is there an inherent law? Are people lawmakers? Or is there an inherent law, right? Our Congress people and legislators like to call themselves lawmakers. And I think they like to think of themselves as lawmakers. And they do make up things that resemble law, like rules and covenants and restrictions and all sorts of codes and things of that nature. And we do need those to get along if we're going to live in tight spaces, especially, which we do, live in cities, and cities have to have policies, and that's why we have politicians, policy makers. They're really policy makers. But the policies cannot trump the laws, so to speak, right? If there's a law, you can't make a policy that negates the law. And if the law truly is, do not take or withhold that which does not rightly belong to you, and we've also abolished slavery, which we say we have, right? Then we can't have policies that supersede that. And this is why I say, well, we're really not truly free because we have policies that supersede law, right? Law sets free. Law, in the Bible, David said he loves the law because the law set him free, right? And I totally agree. The law will set you free if you hold to the real law, the genuine law, which is love God, love your neighbor, love yourself, which is, on the other hand, don't take that which doesn't rightly belong to you, and don't withhold it either. But how do you know what rightly belongs to whom and why? This is at the core of it all, and this should be at the core of it, not just for Christians who are concerned that they might hear on that day when they say, Lord, Lord, didn't I? And he'll say, away from me, worker of lawlessness. I would be concerned for that if I was a Christian. But even if you want to deny Christ, or you want to pursue some other religion. That's one of the beautiful freedoms that we do have in this country, is that you're free to worship as you see fit, as you believe is right. You're free to pursue the knowledge of the higher, whatever the higher is. You're free to pursue it. You're not forced into, nope, you have to believe this way, right? Although we do force people into, you have to believe this way in a lot of ways, and I do believe that that's kind of inherent too. That people are required. You're required to believe I have a right to life. You're required to believe I have a right to liberty. You're required to believe I have a right to pursue happiness. And if you try to take those away from me, you're exceeding your authority, right? So we can have different opinions, and we can have different views, different worldviews, different frames, all that stuff, and we can still have law, right? And we must. The problem is that even the people that we've elected have overstepped those bounds, and they've stepped outside that vertical shaft of authority, right? If all the authority comes from above, if the law is the authority and the law applies equally to all, which we all kind of get, yeah, it has to apply equally to all. If it doesn't apply equally to all, how is it law? It's just privilege, right?
Let me see if I'm getting this right. Previously, you'd said that all law, and the founder said this, comes from the Creator,
Right?
and supersedes policy, rules, codes, legislation, shall we say.
Yep. Well, should. Yep.
So how do we know what those laws are? We talked last week about the Declaration of Independence, and there was 3 listed in there, right? And then you said they were missing one. Could you go back over that again?
Sure. And how do we get to that too is a great question, right? We talked earlier about the right to the air, and we all agree, yeah, you've definitely got a right to the air, because without the right to the air, how are you going to breathe? Without breathing, how are you going to survive? So the logical argument that follows that is, okay, well, what else do you need to survive, right? Well, you're going to need protection from the elements, coverings of some variety, right? It might be as simple as clothes. It might be housing. Depends on the environment that you're in. But that's the second most important thing in relation to maintaining your life, is getting out of the elements. You can, there's the old maxim, you can live 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without protection from the elements, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, right? Some can go considerably longer than 3 weeks, but a lot of us would starve in 3 weeks. So if those are the 4 things you need, then you look and you go, okay, well, what are the sources, right? Coverings come from, at the very least, things like plants that we turn into clothes, but mostly natural fibers, things like that. We build buildings. They're made out of wood and concrete and stone and brick and all different things of that nature, metals. All those are sourced at the land, right? And of course, they include labor. If you're gonna get protection from the elements, there's gonna have to be labor. And my thought is, if you're free, then you still have the responsibility to provide the labor, right? But you also have to have the right to access to the land and to the water, right? Without access to the water, there's a lot of people trying to say nowadays, nope, you don't have the right to the water. They flat out say you do not have a right to land. Land is a privilege, period. You have to earn it. Okay, but then who do I earn it from? And how did we get that in the first place, right? And you look, and pretty much all the land has been stolen at one point or another from somebody else who was there. So did they have a right to it, and then do we not have any right to any of it if our fathers and mothers and whatnot are the ones who stole it? How does that work? And I think what it comes down to is, if you're going to have a moral society, if you're going to be ethical as a group, you have to recognize rights. Otherwise, you're lawless. I said earlier, there's 3 things. There's chaos, there's order, and there's chaos masquerading as order. So order is when you have the law. And the law has always been, from the beginning of time, the law has always been rights. That's the 0 point. Everything to the left of it is transgressing rights. Everything to the right of it is respecting rights. And it goes off into the distance. Like you can love simply by going, yep, you have a right to property. You recognize that? That's love. You help ensure that it's done? That's even more love, right? You give it? Wow, that's maybe even more love. And nope, you don't have a right to property. I'm taking your property. Nope, your property can be taken at any time and it doesn't matter and there's nothing you can do about it. That's chaos, right? This is my evidence for order. The argument itself is the authority. I say this, I'm sure if there's some people watching right now, they're probably like, who is this guy? Why should I listen to this guy? And I'll tell you, don't listen to me, listen to my argument. It isn't about degrees, it isn't about training, it isn't about, it isn't, the argument from authority isn't the thing to look for. The argument itself and the validity of the argument is the thing to look for, right? Doesn't really matter if a 6-year-old kid tells you this, right? If the 6-year-old kid's argument is strong and correct, then it is. I often think about that because I think, well, who are you? I have this knowledge somehow. In 2007, our economy tanked. I lost a lot. So did a lot of people who I really cared about. I started looking at it going, what the heck? And I realized what had happened was greedy people trying to get rich, acting immorally. And in the end, we bailed out banks. We didn't bail out people. We didn't help the individuals. The system failed. It really failed. And it was disconcerting for me. I heard people say, well, what are you going to do, right? And shrug their shoulders. What are you going to do? And I had the same problem. Shrug my shoulders. I don't know. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? It's big. It's huge. It's gigantic. It's bigger than political parties. It's everything. It's the global central banking cabal and the concept of fiat money and fractional reserve lending. It's corporations that gain power and get huge, and now there's a few of them running everything, basically. We talked once about BlackRock and Vanguard and how those guys, they run everything. They control the media, they control the military, they get most of the military bids, right, for building. I mean, they're the major shareholders in Raytheon, in McDonnell Douglas, in Grumman. They control so much, and they never go away. How do you deal with issues like this, right? I mean, we have laws in this country about monopolies. We have laws, governing trusts and antitrust laws, the Sherman Antitrust Act and whatnot. But they don't. Ultimately, they're kind of like Band-Aids on a dying man. They're not sufficient. And I got sick of going, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I didn't want to be that guy. I wanted to be able to think, I know what we can do. So I started thinking about it. I started looking. In the places that I thought I might find it. I looked to our history, right? I looked to our founding documents. I looked in the Bible, right? I looked, does God does God have a system that he has recommended in relation to governance and money? You would think we would all wonder that question, right? You would think, as people who go to church and believe, you would think that would be our first question. What does God recommend? Has he ever made a recommendation? Has God a capitalist, right? Has God a socialist? Has God a communist? Does God recommend any of those things? Turns out he made some really clear recommendations, or actually decrees, to the Israelites when they went into the Promised Land. He said, this is how I want you to do it. I want a sound shekel, right? He didn't use the dollar, he used the shekel. We use the dollar, right? And it's to weigh this much, and the scales are to be in the temple. And by the way, I hate faulty scales, right? Doesn't like theft. Should be obvious from the 10 Commandments that Moses came down with. They're all about theft. They're all about either taking or withholding that which does not rightly belong to you, right? So I realized, okay, God doesn't like theft, and He doesn't even like money theft. I think about, who did Jesus get mad at when He was here? Did He ever get mad? Yep, He got mad. Who did He get mad at? Money changers at the temple. Didn't like that. Threw those guys out, drove them out with a whip. That was awesome. All right, He didn't think it was too awesome. Teachers of the law, right? He wasn't too keen on the misconstruing of the law, right? And the rulers, right? The rulers and the teachers of the law and the money guys who misconstrued the law and used it incorrectly, Jesus Himself rebuked. Everybody else, He basically just extended grace, and He was like, stop sinning, but you're forgiven, right? But those guys who were the authorities, right? This is the thing. That's what we struggle against. And that's important to remember too for all of us. It's not the person, right? It's not the person. It's not Donald Trump. It's not Joe Biden. It's not Nancy Pelosi. It's not any of those people. No matter how much they get under your skin and drive you nuts with their worldviews and their frame, right? If they're wrong, they're misled, right? They're not the ultimate enemy. There is an ultimate enemy of mankind, right? He comes to lie and to steal and to mislead and to kill, right? That's what he does. There's also an ultimate king of mankind. He comes that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. Get to know his voice, right? And get to know the enemy's voice too. The enemy's crafty and tricky, and they like to make excuses why it's not stealing or why it's okay to be stealing, but it's not. This is what I figured out. You got to stop the stealing, right? We gotta recognize the law. Instead of shrug our shoulders, go, what are you gonna do? Go, yeah, what are you gonna do? What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? So I looked at all these works of great men who came before, and I tried to say, is there any way we could apply the principles to the world today, right? To our world, to your world, my world. Is there something that we could rally to, that we could vote for, that we could push for, that we could expect? And it took me about 2 years, but I ultimately came up with this concept that I call the Jubilee Solution. And it's 7 steps. And I'd love to break it down for you.
Yeah, let's do that. Stay tuned for next time.
Yeah. Push pause.